The emergency alert broadcast sent the surrounding shoppers into shock, disarray, and madness. With our shopping cart full of supplies, I whispered to the teenage cashier, "You may want to get the hell out of Dodge and head for safer conditions." "Is this minimum wage job worth risking your life?" I asked. The exchanging cash for goods was probably the last monetary transaction we would make for the foreseeable future. The cat is out of the bag, and by tonight, the majority of the country would hear directly or indirectly from word of mouth that things were quickly spiraling out of control. From the sounds of the message, it sounded like martial law was imminent. Jim asked, "What exactly is martial law?" In the United States, martial law usually refers to power that in an emergency allows the military to take the place of the civilian government and exercise jurisdiction over civilians in a particular area. It is usually invoked in a time of war, rebellion, or natural disaster. When it is in effect, the military commander of an area or country has unlimited authority to make and enforce laws. I fully expected curfews to be imposed, I told Jim, but truthfully, how could the United States military actually impose and enforce martial law? Jim asked, "What do you mean?" "Think about it," I said. The United States is 2,800 miles wide and covers over almost 4 million square miles with a population of over 330 million. The military doesn't have the logistics or the manpower to successfully pull it off. They'll be focusing their resources on major metropolitan cities. Think New York, LA, Chicago, Houston. On top of that, how many military members do you think will go AWOL so they can be with their families to help protect and take care of them? Same thing goes for municipal and state police departments, I said. As we exited the chaos and confusion that was Food Town, we continued to bear witness to the current lawlessness playing out. The Walgreens across the parking lot was a free-for-all of most likely medication-grabbing marauders. Those with once normal, ordinary medicine treating conditions were now thrust into panic and anxiety, hoping to score an additional supply of doses. I pushed as Jim pulled the near full to capacity shopping cart through the unplowed parking lot concealed in 10 fresh inches of snow. As I made eye contact with Brian, I could tell something was wrong. "What is it?" I yelled over to him. That's when I heard the commotion and clamor coming from the liquor store in the same plaza as Food Town. "Where's Jody?" Jim anxiously asked. Brian said a group of locals smashed out the windows, and after Jody heard the emergency alert, she jumped out and headed in after them to score some liquor. I tried to stop her, but didn't want to leave the truck unattended. She just took off less than a minute ago. Great. Just what we needed. A search and rescue mission because she wanted to acquire some booze as our town slipped vastly into carnage, I angrily shouted. "Jim, load up the groceries into the bed of Brian's truck and stay here with him to protect them. I'm not going home empty-handed from this mission. I'll go find Jody and bring her back safely." By 9:30 a.m., the plaza and surrounding stores were full-on madness and mayhem. The liquor store was 3 storefronts down from the grocery store, and once the glass was shattered, the melee was on. Hordes of selfish and self-centered people were pushing and shoving their way in to loot liquor and wine bottles. Even in a small, tight-knit community, the worst of people was being showcased in SHTF. I approached cautiously, with my right hand firmly planted on my Glock 19 that was still holstered on my strong side. Splintered, fractured, and imploded glass littered the entrance to the dark, unlit liquor store. As I scanned from left to right, I counted over a dozen plunderers pouncing on now free bottles, fearing no repercussions for their actions. Bottles were crashing and exploding onto the floor as they struggled, juggling and holding on to their stolen merchandise. I knew Jody would be over to the right where the fireball was located at. It was her go-to shot. Sure enough, there she was, I hollered over at her, "What are you doing? It's time to go." Surprised and shocked to see me, she reached for one more bottle when instantaneously I heard the familiar rack of a shotgun. It was the owner of the store showing up to protect his property. He was Korean. Kim Lee was his name. I knew him from my many trips into here pre-CME. Seeing him at the entrance with a loaded shotgun pointed at the insanity playing out, I immediately had flashbacks to the many Korean-American business owners taking up arms on the rooftops during the 1992 Los Angeles uprisings, involving the acquittal of the 4 LA policemen caught on video beating Rodney King. I promptly stepped in front of Jody, shielding her from the impending danger. Kim Lee ordered everyone to drop what they had and instantly leave his store before he was forced to make a lethal and possibly fatal decision. As I commanded Jody to drop her box of pilfered supplies, one of the other larcenists hurled a bottle of alcohol in Kim Lee's direction. With no lighting and an overcast snowy sky outside, he didn't see it coming from the dark shadows inside his own store. The bottle made contact directly on the bridge of his nose. He stumbled backwards and without intention pulled the trigger of his loaded firearm. I grabbed Jody and we took cover behind the register counter. Screams and bellows let out as multiple looters were struck by what I presumed was buckshot. The first gunshot fired during Armageddon had killed at least one and injured several others. Those fortunate enough to escape the spread of buckshot quickly pounced on Kim Lee and his now badly bloodied face. A routine supply run mission on day one had now turned into a survival mission that had witnessed tragedy, misfortune, and calamity. The echoing sound of a 12-gauge gunshot could be sure to be heard throughout the entire plaza. Pandemonium and anarchy sent everyone into a frenzy. Brian radioed on the two-way, asking what was going on after hearing the uproar take place. I told him. Multiple people were shot and fights were breaking out. I need you to pull up and get us out of here. I was no medic, but I could see some of the gunshot victim wounds may be fatal. A man laid motionless 10 feet in front of us, profusely bleeding from a hole in his neck. By now the shotgun had been wrestled away from Kim Lee as the angry mob continued stomping and beating him. I didn't want to risk the peril and uncertainty of exiting out the entrance as the ruckus transpired. I couldn't chance shooting out the glass storefront behind the register and striking an innocent civilian, or worse yet, hitting Brian or Jim. I reached for a Louisville Slugger bat that Kim Lee had behind the counter for a less lethal form of protection and told Jody to cover her face. With one mighty and robust swing, I created our own egress as Brian's Ford F-150 pulled up to greet us. I reached back for Jody's hand, and neither was it or she there. She refused to leave without her box of booze as she appeared through the broken and battered glass. "We can use it to barter," she nervously said as I lifted her and the alcohol into the bed of the truck. My adrenaline rush was so high, I almost launched her completely across the back of the F-150 and down to the snow-covered parking lot on the other side. I stepped up onto the rear passenger tire, hopped in on top of our groceries, and struck the top of Brian's truck 2 times, signaling him to hightail it out of here. Jody was in complete shock and trauma at what we had just witnessed. Truth was, I was too. I wasn't ex-military or a law enforcement officer. I'm just a cable guy. I had never seen someone shot, let alone multiple people shot before. The smell of fresh gunpowder was still all I could detect as my ears continued ringing. As Brian navigated the parking lot, the collapse of society continued playing out behind us. With Kim Lee incapacitated, the crowd returned, emptying out his now bloody liquor store of horrors. The short 3/4 of a mile journey home couldn't be completed fast enough. As we turned left out of the plaza, the local gas station was now under siege from locals trying to siphon gas from the underground tanks, desperate and distraught to power home generators. Without some sort of vacuum pump to help, it was an almost impossible task to accomplish. Once they realized that, vehicles would be sure to be the next target they would go after. Not only would we be responsible for maintaining the security of our building, but we'd need to keep a set of eyes on our 5 vehicles too. Imagine being forced to bug out and your valuable, irreplaceable gasoline from your vehicle had been completely drained. How far could you make it on foot in the dead of winter? I was both astonished and terrified from the fallout of our mission. Civilization was spiraling and crumbling fast. No sight of the county police or any kind of emergency services as criminality, mutiny, and insurgency broke out in the center of our town. I'd never been happier to be turning into our complex. It really is amazing how 4 walls and a roof can feel so safe and secure in a world gone mad. The crowds outside had grown even larger in numbers since we left just an hour ago. Surely they had heard the gunshot that rang out so close by. Some had most certainly heard the emergency alert broadcast the U.S. government had transmitted. More alarm and nervousness was sure to follow. As Brian steered and turned into his parking spot, numerous neighbors followed closely behind, frightened and horrified by the news they had hearkened. Jim jumped out of the passenger seat, hugging his girlfriend Jody, asking her if she was okay. "Who got shot?" Jim asked. The crowd that was approaching was surprised by Jim's question, gasping and astounded by Jim's inquiry, setting off even more panic in our parking lot. I had hoped not to go down this road with the neighborhood, but Loose Lips Jim had foiled that plan upon arrival. Many of the faces I knew on a first-name basis, but some I did not. Chatter and shrieking was dominating the crowd. "Where are the police?" one woman asked. "Who's shooting people?" another one shouted. "When is the power coming back on?" a young child questioned. I stood up in the back of the truck and asked for everyone to please quiet down and relax, as my own body still trembled with adrenaline. Hoping to bring calmness and serenity to the situation before it convoluted out of control, I started off with, "County and state police will be conducting wellness checks shortly," even though deep down I knew that was probably more fabrication than fact. There was a burglary at the liquor store, and the owner showed up firing a warning shot to help disperse the would-be thief. Again, I needed to bring tranquility and composure to the dozen or so people looking to my group for answers. The last thing I desired was for violence and unrest to break out and topple over us. I added, things are getting a little rough and crude out there because people are not keeping cool heads. It's best if everyone hunkers down inside and does their best to keep warm. Remember to ration your supplies, and if you absolutely need anything and it's critical you require it, you better go now. Regrettably, I knew those last few words could mean sending individuals on a possible suicide mission. But my biggest concern was getting our supplies inside, regrouping, and fortifying the security of our building. I couldn't help but notice the disturbing look one man in the group named Bart gave me. He was a 30-something degenerate who lived in the building across from us. I heard rumors of his dependency on drugs and his battles with being manic depressive. He lived with his girlfriend and 2 young children. The county sheriff was no stranger to him either. I'd routinely seen them show up at the residence. It was a look I wouldn't soon forget. As the crowds began to disperse, the 4 of us began unloading our haul. Brian asked what the hell happened in the liquor store, what went wrong. Jim and I heard the gunshot and feared the worst for you and Jody. I recanted the experience and reinforced to my grid-down apocalypse squad how quickly things can transition with no fear of rule of law in this world. Jody made one pretentious, selfish, and foolish decision that could have cost her life, and or mine. All for a few bottles of alcohol to fuel an addiction or habit. I need better out of you, Jody. I need you to be smart, sharp, and astute, as I continued scolding her. Now let's get these supplies up to my place and unpack everything. Brian, take the shoddy I gave you and stay watch in the hallway guarding our front door. Other than the first floor sliding glass doors on Jim and Brian's apartments, it was the only entrance to our building. From here on out, it's imperative we always have someone on watch. I wanted to make it as difficult as possible for anyone to make entrance through your guys' patio areas. We're going to remove the closet doors from all 4 apartments, drive nails and screws through them, then screw them down to your patio decks and my balcony deck. I had a vast supply of hardware, and Jim as a maintenance man had even more. Jim and I would spend the next few hours working on security, safety, and fortifying our building as Jody unpacked and fired up my propane grill so we could indulge in some of the ribeye steaks we had grabbed on our run today. If there was ever an hour to enjoy grilling outside in December, now was that time. By week 1 or 2, you wouldn't want to be caught outside cooking $25 per pound luxury dinners while your neighbors were starving and resorting to meals that consisted of pet food. Desperate, hungry, malnourished people will become the most dangerous type of individuals when the world goes to shit. If you are flourishing and thriving while they are withering away, you can bet they will come after what you have by any means necessary. Even after the events that occurred today, I still wasn't convinced Jim, Jody, and Brian understood how grim and atrocious the current situation was. Maybe they wouldn't truly comprehend it until death came knocking down our door. I hoped and prayed that day would never come, but I had seen movies like The Road and read books like 1 Second After. I knew it was inevitable that some sort of plight would bring slaughter and bloodbath to our doorstep eventually.